Why did they always laugh before she even spoke? Staff Sergeant Riley Thompson stood in the armory that morning, shoulders squared, movements careful, deliberate. Around her, the chatter of Navy SEALs filled the air like static, loud, confident, self-assured. They laughed easily, mostly at her expense, and always the same line. "Hey, Barbie, bringing your dream gun today." Petty Officer Martinez called out from across the room, his grin wide enough to earn a ripple of laughter from the rest. She didn't look up. She never did. The pink rifle gleamed under the fluorescent light, a glaring contrast against the racks of dark, regulation black weapons around it. Flamingo pink, unapologetic, the kind of color that turned heads. For the SEALs, it was a joke that never got old. For her, it was armor. Riley's hands moved with mechanical precision, running a cloth across the barrel, checking the scope's adjustments, her routine as steady as breathing. She said nothing. Words had never won her ground here. Beneath the jokes, beneath the looks, beneath the pink, was a rifle unlike any other. Hand-lapped barrel, a Schmidt and Bender scope that cost more than most soldiers' cars, a trigger so finely tuned it responded like thought itself. Every component modified, tested, perfected over years of obsessive focus. She had built this weapon the way some people built churches, piece by piece, with reverence. But they never saw that. They only saw the paint. She had painted it 18 months ago, in a moment of frustration that had started as defiance. If they were going to treat her rifle like a toy, she thought, then she might as well lean into the insult. Make it a toy. Make it impossible for them to see past their own assumptions. And maybe, just maybe, she could turn their underestimation into her shield. It worked, just not the way she had hoped. Respect hadn't come. Mockery had doubled. But behind their smirks, their rolling eyes, she had gained something else: space. No one challenged her too closely. No one bothered trying to prove they were better. They thought the pink rifle was already proof enough. "Thompson," a steadier voice cut through the noise. Master Sergeant Davis approached, clipboard in hand, his expression firm but not unkind. 1,000-meter range today. Precision drills, then extended shots. "Yes, Sergeant." He leaned in slightly, lowering his tone. "SEALs asked to observe." Her jaw tightened. Of course they had. A new chance to laugh, a new audience for the Barbie show. "Understood, Sergeant," she said evenly. By 800, Riley was prone at the long-range facility, the morning sun cresting over the jagged ridgelines of the Isra Mountains. The air was crisp, still. Perfect shooting weather. 8 SEALs clustered at the observation post, arms folded, postures casual, as if they'd come to watch a comedy rather than a demonstration. Their senior, Chief Petty Officer Jackson, stood with his hands behind his back, eyes cool and skeptical. "Thompson," he called out, voice edged with disdain. "We're here to see your unique approach. Tell me, why paint a weapon like that, trying to make a statement?" Her cheek rested against the stock as she adjusted her bipod. "Chief, the color doesn't affect ballistic performance. Function matters more than appearance." Jackson's lips curled faintly. "Appearance matters for discipline, for cohesion, for professionalism. Tell me, how are we supposed to take you seriously when your rifle looks like it belongs in a toy aisle?" Riley didn't flinch. Her breathing stayed slow, measured. "You're supposed to judge results, not paint." The first target stood at 800, 1,000, and 1,200 meters, bread and butter distances for her. She squeezed the trigger with steady rhythm, each shot breaking like glass under careful pressure. The steel targets rang in perfect sequence, grouping so tight it was almost surgical. The observers' chatter faltered. "Not bad," one of them muttered as she logged a sub-3-inch group at 1,200. But not bad wasn't the same as respect. Jackson crossed his arms. "Controlled conditions, no stress. Real combat isn't this forgiving." She ignored him, dialing for 1,800 meters. Crosswind tugged at her bullet paths, forcing her into complex mental calculations most shooters would fumble. She tracked air density, adjusted for spin drift, felt the rhythm of the mountain breeze like a second pulse in her veins. One by one, the distant targets fell. By the time she reached 2,000 meters, silence had replaced mockery. The pink rifle thundered, and with it, something inside her tightened, then loosened again. She wasn't shooting for them. She was shooting for herself, for every night she'd sat alone in her quarters, doubting if she even belonged. For every dismissal, every smirk, every whispered word that she'd only been given her slot because the army needed to fill quotas. The last round landed with perfect precision. She lowered the rifle, pulled her ear protection off. Jackson's voice came slower this time. "Your accuracy's good, I'll give you that. But can you do it when lives depend on it? When chaos surrounds you? When failure means someone doesn't come home?" Riley locked the bolt back, cleared the chamber, began packing her rifle with the same quiet, methodical care. She didn't look at him. "I guess we'll find out when the time comes." She couldn't have known it would come sooner than anyone expected. That night, as shadows stretched long across the base and the mountains swallowed the sun, the alarm shrieked through the compound. Not the routine drill tone, not a false alarm. This was the one every soldier knew in their bones: imminent threat. Riley grabbed her rifle case, boots pounding against concrete as she ran for the operations center. Inside, the air was thick with voices, radios, maps illuminated on glowing screens. Colonel Hayes stood at the center, his face a mask of grim focus. "Intelligence intercept confirms enemy general in grid Delta 7. He's coordinating operations from a temporary command post. Target window, 4 hours. After that, he moves, permanently." A ripple moved through the room. Every operator understood what those words meant. This wasn't routine. This was a chance to sever the head of the snake. Chief Jackson stepped forward. "Sir, what's the distance from our forward observation point?" 3,500 meters, Hayes replied. The silence that followed was suffocating. 3,500 meters, nearly 2 miles, past the boundary of what most considered possible for small arms. Jackson shook his head slightly. "That's outside effective range. Even under perfect conditions, it's a gamble." Hayes's eyes shifted across the room, landing squarely on Riley. "Thompson, maximum range of your system." Her heart thudded once heavy. She drew a slow breath. "Sir, under ideal conditions, 2,800 meters. Beyond that, environmental factors make accuracy unpredictable." "But theoretically—" She hesitated. Words carried weight here. "Theoretically, yes, but probability of success decreases sharply beyond 3,000. Hayes didn't blink. "This mission is volunteer only. It's an extreme shot under marginal conditions, but the payoff is significant. Eliminate this target and we cripple their regional command." The room was silent again. Eyes flicked toward her, mockers, skeptics, doubters, all of them waiting. Riley's throat was dry, but her voice was steady. "I'll take the shot, sir." For the first time all day, no one laughed. Preparation consumed the next 3 hours. She studied satellite imagery, analyzed weather reports, ran ballistic calculations until the numbers blurred. She weighed her custom loads, rejecting rounds that deviated by a fraction of a grain. Precision at this range wasn't just difficult, it bordered on the absurd. A mistake smaller than a blink would mean failure. By the time the convoy moved out toward the ridge, the sky was bleeding into twilight. Riley carried the pink rifle across her chest, its paint catching what little light remained. For 18 months it had been the punchline. Tonight it was her only voice. Jackson walked beside her, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak until they reached the observation point. "Thompson, you understand, if you miss, it won't just be your reputation. Lives are at stake." She set the case down, opened it, laid the weapon across her lap. Her fingers brushed the stock. "I understand, Chief." And she did, more than he could know. Because tonight there would be no drills, no jokes, no second chances, only one shot. and she had to decide whether she believed in herself more than everyone else's doubt combined. What do you think about when silence becomes heavier than sound? On the ridge above Grid Delta 7, the night air carried that kind of silence, the weighty, fragile stillness that pressed into your chest, the kind that magnified every heartbeat until it felt like thunder. Riley lay prone, her cheek against the stock of her pink rifle, staring through a scope that turned darkness into something watchful, unforgiving. The observation post overlooked a valley cut sharp into the mountains. The enemy command post squatted on the far slope, a shadowed fortress of stone and steel. Distance, 3,487 meters, nearly 2 miles of air, uncertainty, and physics between her and the man inside. The mission clock ticked steadily in her ear, 90 minutes until the window opened. She breathed slow, deliberate, pushing down the tight coil of adrenaline in her chest. She could feel the SEALs behind her, quiet now, their usual noise stripped away by the seriousness of what lay ahead. Jackson monitored wind instruments, his voice calm, professional. Southeast, 8 to 12 knots. Temperature dropping. Barometric pressure steady. She logged every note into her mental ledger. Numbers, equations, tiny adjustments to aim at nothing, to fire at emptiness, to trust a bullet to arrive 4 seconds later where mathematics predicted a man would stand. Her hands were steady, but inside her thoughts cracked and splintered. What if she missed? Not just the shot. What if she proved them right? What if the SEALs went back to their barracks and told the story of the Army sniper who couldn't deliver, who decorated her rifle like a toy and shot like one too? What if every smirk, every laugh, every whisper became prophecy instead of memory? She closed her eyes, pressing her cheek harder against the stock. She remembered painting the rifle pink that night, her hand shaking, brush dragging across steel as if daring herself to commit to the absurd. She remembered the sound of Martinez's first laugh, loud and cutting, and the way the room had joined him. She had wanted to scream then, to smash the weapon, to quit. But instead she had smiled, nodded, walked away. And then she had shot again and again until performance spoke louder than pride. Now performance was all she had left. Jackson's voice cut in, softer this time. Window in 45, stay sharp. She exhaled slowly. Copy. The SEAL chief hadn't mocked her once tonight. His tone had shifted, not warm, not approving, but edged with something harder. Respect. No, not yet. Maybe just recognition that this ridge wasn't the place for ridicule. She wondered if he'd ever understand what it was like to carry mockery like rations, to eat it every day, swallow it down, and let it fuel instead of starve, to be underestimated so thoroughly that even excellence became invisible. Maybe he didn't need to. Maybe this shot wasn't about proving anything to him, or any of them. Maybe it was about proving something to herself. The minutes crawled. Riley adjusted her scope, recalculated, checked and rechecked numbers until the lines blurred. At this distance, every variable became monstrous. The Coriolis effect, rotation of the Earth itself, shifted her aim inches. A shift in wind mid-flight meant feet of error. Even the heat of the barrel could bend possibility into failure. Her mind spiraled between equations and memories. She thought of Davis, her sergeant, who never mocked her, who only asked for numbers and gave her space to deliver. She thought of the first time she touched a rifle, back when her father had placed one in her hands on a farm field in Nebraska. His voice steady, telling her the secret wasn't strength, it was stillness. That bullets weren't forced, they were released. He would have laughed at the pink. Not cruelly, but with that quiet shake of the head that meant he understood even if he didn't agree. And maybe he would have said the same thing Davis did, the same thing she told herself now. Function matters more than appearance. She breathed it in, held it, released. Target movement, Jackson whispered. Her eyes snapped to the scope. Figures flickered through windows, shadows crossing light. Guards, messengers, none of them mattered, not yet. The general hadn't stepped out. Window opens in 10, Jackson said. His voice was calm, but she could feel the tension in the air, a shared pulse that bound them all to the ground. Riley adjusted her aim. The crosshairs hovered over an empty slice of balcony where the target would appear. She mapped it already. 6 feet left, 12 high. She wasn't aiming at him. She was aiming at mathematics. Her body felt like stone. Only her finger moved, brushing the trigger guard, finding its resting place. Her heartbeat slowed 1, 2, 3, until the world narrowed to a circle of glass. 5 minutes. Her breathing deepened. She could hear every detail of the ridge, a rock settling under weight, the whisper of fabric as one of the seals shifted, the hum of electricity in distant radios. 4 minutes. Her eyes burned. She blinked once, twice, forcing clarity back. 3 minutes. Jackson murmured, atmospheric stable, wind holding. 2 minutes. The balcony door slid open. A man stepped out, tall, uniformed, binoculars in hand. The enemy general. Riley felt everything inside her tighten, as if the entire 18 months of mockery, the endless laughter, the doubts, the loneliness, the stubbornness, all of it, had been funneling into this single, fragile instant. 90 seconds. She made her final adjustments, every number aligned, every equation set, her body locked into a stillness that bordered on surrender. The crosshairs didn't rest on him. They floated in emptiness, and she trusted that emptiness to deliver her answer. 80 seconds. Her breathing slowed. The world went quiet. She thought of her father again, of his steady hands, his quiet smile. She thought of the SEALs behind her, watching in silence, waiting for failure. She thought of herself, 18 months younger, furious, painting steel with defiance. 60 seconds. Her finger curled around the trigger, pressure featherlight. The rifle wasn't a tool now. It was an extension of thought, of will, of defiance hardened into steel. 45 seconds. Jackson's voice, "Wind steady, you're green." 30 seconds. She let her final breath go. And then nothing. Only stillness. Only the pink rifle and the space between. Only one shot left in the world. What does it feel like to wait for destiny, with your finger resting on steel? Riley didn't move. Not her head, not her body, not even the muscles in her face. Through the scope, the balcony stretched like a stage waiting for its act to begin. The general stood there, framed by stone and shadow, scanning the horizon through his binoculars as if daring the mountains themselves to challenge him. Her cheek pressed harder into the stock, the pink paint cold against her skin. 4 seconds of flight time, that was all it would take once she squeezed. But until then, she had to hold herself against the avalanche of her own mind. Her pulse thundered. She could feel it in her throat, in her wrists, in her temples. At 3,487 meters, even the faintest movement of breath could shift destiny by yards. She slowed it, forced it down, counting silently the way she had since her earliest days on the range. 1 inhale, hold. Exhale, release. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, gentle and firm. "Don't fight the rifle, Riley. Let it be what it is. You're not forcing the bullet, you're freeing it." She could see him as clearly as if he were beside her. The Nebraska fields behind their old farmhouse, sunlight hot on her back, the weight of a .22 pressed into her hands as a girl. Her father's shadow at her side, teaching her how to feel calm in chaos, how to measure not with her eyes but with her patience. "You're too tense," he had told her once, crouching behind her on that field. "Stillness doesn't mean stiff, it means trusting." Back on the ridge she trusted, or at least she tried. 40 seconds, Jackson murmured behind her. His voice was tight but even, professional. The skepticism that had defined every interaction between them seemed gone, stripped bare by the reality of this moment. "Wind steady," another SEAL reported. Riley's eyes locked on her scope. The general was still surveying, his movements unhurried. He was a man who believed himself untouchable. 2 miles of mountains, weather, and physics stood between him and any threat. He had no idea that a pink rifle was aimed at him. 30 seconds. Her finger tightened slightly, trigger pressure featherlight. The shot had to break like glass, clean, silent, inevitable. She thought of every time they had laughed, of Martinez's grin, of Jackson's dismissive tone, of the whispers when she walked into the mess hall. She thought of sitting alone in her bunk at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why she was here at all. 18 months of mockery had brought her here, but it wasn't vengeance she felt now. It was something deeper, something quieter. She wanted stillness. She wanted proof. 20 seconds. The world shrank to a circle of glass. Everything outside the scope fell away. The seals, the ridge, the base, the war itself. All that remained was mathematics, patience, and a man who didn't know his life had already been decided. 15. Her breathing slowed until her chest barely moved. Her heart found its rhythm, slower, steadier, each beat stretching into forever. 10. The general lowered his binoculars, turning slightly, profile caught in the scope. 987. Riley's eyes didn't blink. 6-5. Her finger tightened. 4. The world was silent. 3. Her breath stopped. 2. The trigger gave way. 1. The pink rifle spoke. The sound cracked across the ridge, sharp and absolute. The recoil pressed into her shoulder, familiar and grounding. And then nothing. No impact, no instant result, just silence. The bullet was in the air, invisible, carving an arc through 2 miles of atmosphere, traveling faster than sound, yet taking almost 4 seconds to arrive. Riley didn't breathe. No one behind her moved. Her mind screamed the calculations again. Air density, wind drift, gravity, Coriolis. Did she trust the math? Did she trust herself? 3 seconds. She thought of every round she had fired in solitude, every late night on the range when no one cared to watch. She thought of the paintbrush dragging across steel, of her hands shaking with anger but steadying with resolve. She thought of stillness. 2 seconds. She imagined her father's voice again. Release it. Let the bullet find its truth. 1 second. Through the scope, the general's head erupted. Blood and bones scattered across the balcony wall, his body collapsing backward in a motion almost too slow for her racing heart to comprehend. The binoculars clattered to stone. Holy, Jackson's whisper cut off. His scope remained fixed, confirming what all of them had just seen. Target eliminated, direct hit. Silence hung on the ridge for a beat too long, broken only by the wind. The impossible had just happened, and the weight of it pressed on everyone present. Riley didn't move. Her eyes stayed against the scope, body still stone. She didn't need to confirm, she knew. Slowly she exhaled. Her fingers slipped from the trigger guard. Behind her, voices finally broke the silence. Not mocking, not skeptical, just stunned. Jackson's tone carried something she had never heard before, something close to awe. 3,487 meters, longest confirmed kill in military history. Riley lifted her head at last, pulling away from the scope. She blinked, her eyes burning from the strain of holding so long. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't triumphant. She was simply still. She began breaking down her position, moving with the same careful, methodical motions she always did, packing her rifle, logging her numbers, professional, detached. Physics, mathematics, practice, that was all. But inside, something else moved, something fragile, something that had been waiting 18 months to be acknowledged. She had taken the shot no one believed possible, and she had done it with the rifle they had laughed at. The pink rifle had spoken, and it had spoken louder than every insult combined. The SEALs didn't know what to say. Jackson finally cleared his throat. Thompson. She paused, looking up at him. That was the most incredible shot I've seen in 15 years. His words faltered. I owe you an apology, we all do. Her face didn't soften, she only nodded. Understood, Chief. The convoy back to base was quiet. Radios buzzed with chatter from command, words spreading faster than the wheels beneath them. The impossible shot had already become a story. By the time they rolled through the gates, the story was legend. Colonel Hayes was waiting at the checkpoint, his expression unreadable until he stepped forward. Intelligence confirms target eliminated. Thompson, he stopped, studied her face, then spoke more firmly. That wasn't just a mission, that was history. She nodded once more, her rifle case in her lap. History, maybe. But for her, it was something else entirely. For the first time in 18 months, silence felt like respect. What does respect sound like when you've never heard it before? The convoy rolled into forward operating base Vanguard under the pale wash of midnight floodlights. Dust kicked up by the vehicles hung in the air, swirling like ghostly smoke as they braked at the checkpoint. Soldiers leaned from doorways, heads turning, voices carrying fragments of rumors that had already begun spreading faster than any official report. Riley kept her hands on the rifle case in her lap. She could feel the cool steel handle against her palm, grounding her. The pink rifle lay inside, silent now but heavier than ever. For years it had been a joke, a prop for laughter. Tonight it was something else. She wasn't sure what, but she could feel the shift. Colonel Hayes stood waiting. His face, usually stern but approachable, was unreadable. He stepped forward as Riley dismounted, boots hitting gravel with a crunch that seemed to echo louder than it should have. Thompson, he said evenly. His gaze flicked toward the rifle case, then back to her eyes. Intelligence confirms the target. Regional command has been disrupted. You didn't just eliminate a man, you eliminated their order. The SEALs behind her shifted, their silence thick, uncharacteristic. For the first time in 18 months, they didn't laugh. They didn't even smirk. They looked at her with the kind of quiet weight usually reserved for those they had lost, or those they had underestimated too long. Riley only nodded. Her voice came out steady. Just doing my job, sir. Hayes's jaw tightened. No, that wasn't just your job, that was rewriting what we thought was possible. He leaned closer, his voice lower. History will remember that shot, Sergeant, whether you want it to or not. History. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. That word didn't feel like victory. It felt like a stone pressing down. She went back to her quarters that night with the base still buzzing around her. Everywhere she walked, eyes followed. Some filled with awe, some with disbelief, a few with envy. Respect was new. It was heavier than mockery, heavier than laughter. At least laughter had been predictable. Inside her room, she shut the door, set the rifle case on the desk, and sat on the edge of the bed. She stared at her hands. They weren't trembling. They weren't anything. The kill replayed in her mind not as glory but as fragments. The balcony, the stillness, the recoil, the head snapping back, exploding in red and bone. She saw it again and again, sharper than her scope had shown it, burned into her. She leaned forward, elbows on knees, pressing her palms into her eyes until the darkness shifted with pressure. He never knew. He never saw me. He never knew the pink rifle existed until it ended him. Her breath shuddered. She hadn't cried in years. She didn't cry now. But the weight sat in her chest, pressing down, unmovable. The next morning the base was different. The SEALs who had once mocked her passed her in the mess hall without comment, their eyes averted, their expressions unreadable. A few nodded, subtle acknowledgments, but none dared speak the old names. No more Barbie, no more Dream Gun. Jackson found her in the armory, her rifle laid out on the table as she cleaned it with her usual care. Thompson, he said quietly. She didn't look up, Chief. He hesitated, then pulled a chair, sitting across from her. His face carried lines of fatigue, but his tone was steady. I've been wrong about a lot of people in my career, but I don't think I've ever been more wrong than I was about you. Her hand stilled on the cleaning rod. She raised her eyes slowly. "You made the most impossible shot I've ever witnessed," he said. "I mocked you, we all did, and I want to say I'm sorry." Silence stretched. Riley blinked once, then returned her attention to the rifle. "Apologies don't change the past, Chief." "No," he admitted, "but maybe they change tomorrow." She didn't answer. She finished cleaning, reassembled the rifle, locked the bolt forward. Only then did she glance at him. "Do you want to know why I painted it pink?" Jackson tilted his head. "I've wondered since day one." She set the rifle down, leaned back in her chair. "Because I was tired of people not taking me seriously no matter what I did. So I figured if they were going to underestimate me anyway, I'd give them a reason. Make their bias so obvious they couldn't hide from it." He frowned. "That's a dangerous game to play." She shrugged faintly. "It worked, just not the way I thought it would." Jackson let out a long breath, then stood. "Whatever the reason, you proved something no one else could, and for what it's worth, you have my respect." She didn't say thank you. Respect wasn't a gift to be received. It was something earned, fought for, bled for. And tonight, it felt almost like another weight she wasn't sure she wanted. 2 weeks later, the ceremony was held. Senior officials flown in, cameras recording, speeches prepared. Riley stood in her dress uniform, the bronze star pinned to her chest by a general who called her a pioneer in precision marksmanship. The words felt distant, hollow. Applause rang through the assembly hall, but Riley barely heard it. She stared at the plaque in her hand, the medal's weight against her uniform. She thought of the balcony again. The head. The silence afterward. Afterward, reporters asked questions. Military historians requested interviews. Ballistics experts demanded details. They all wanted to know how she had done it, how she had calculated what no one else dared attempt. She gave them the same answer every time. Physics, mathematics, practice. What she never said was the truth, that it wasn't just physics. It was anger, loneliness, the grinding pressure of being dismissed, day after day, until the only thing left to do was aim at silence and prove them catastrophically wrong. Weeks passed. The laughter never returned. Instead, whispers followed her now, whispers of awe, of legend. Soldiers who once mocked her now asked for advice, tips, guidance. Some couldn't even meet her eyes. The pink rifle had become something else entirely. No longer Barbie's dream gun. Now they called it the Pink Death. Riley kept the paint. She refused every offer to strip it back to regulation black. The pink was her reminder of frustration, of underestimation, of what it meant to be judged before being seen. But late at night, alone in her quarters, she wondered what it had really cost her. Because respect she had learned didn't erase doubt. It didn't quiet memory. And it didn't change the fact that when she closed her eyes, she still saw the man on the balcony. Mockery had been easier. At least mockery had been survivable. Respect, she realized, was heavier, and now she had to carry it. What happens when the world suddenly demands answers you don't have? 3 days after the shot, Riley was summoned to Colonel Hayes's office. She walked in crisp, uniform-perfect rifle case left behind in the armory. Hayes sat behind his desk, a folder marked classified spread open before him. His eyes studied her like she was another report, something to be analyzed, dissected. "Sit, Sergeant." She obeyed, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. "Word has spread," Hayes began, voice measured. "Faster than we can control. The Pentagon knows. Special Operations Command knows. The Army Marksmanship Unit knows. Everyone wants to understand how you did it." Riley's throat tightened. She wanted to say it again, physics, mathematics, practice, but Hayes wasn't asking for a sound bite. "They want your data, your methods, your rifle," he continued. He slid the folder toward her. "Effective immediately, you're being temporarily reassigned to Research and Development Command at Aberdeen Proving Ground. You'll work with ballistics engineers to replicate what you achieved." She blinked. The words felt distant, surreal. Aberdeen, research, scientists, labs. She was a field sniper, not a scientist. She belonged on ridges, not in sterile rooms under fluorescent lights. "Sir," she said carefully, "with respect, my place is operational. I'm a soldier, not—" Hayes cut her off. "Your shot advanced our understanding of long-range engagement by years, maybe decades. You bridged the gap between theory and reality. We need you to help us close that gap permanently." Her stomach sank. "Sir, what I did isn't repeatable. It required conditions, preparation, luck." "Luck doesn't explain 3,487 meters," Hayes said firmly. His gaze softened slightly. "I know this isn't where you thought you'd be, but sometimes the Army needs more than shooters. Sometimes it needs pioneers." The word struck her harder than praise ever had. Pioneer. It didn't feel like honor. It felt like exile. 2 weeks later, Riley stepped off a transport plane into Maryland's damp summer air. Aberdeen proving ground sprawled in ordered lines and test ranges, nothing like the mountains she'd left behind. She carried the pink rifle in its case, eyes of civilians and officers alike following her as though she carried a relic. Inside the labs, engineers hovered around her weapon with reverence. They x-rayed it, measured it, photographed every angle. To them, it was Barbie's dream gun. It was a holy artifact. Dr. Patricia Chen, the lead ballistics engineer, adjusted her glasses as she peered at the printouts. "Your modifications, they create harmonic dampening we've been chasing for years. How did you determine these tolerances?" "Trial and error," Riley said flatly. Chen looked up, incredulous. "Over 3 years, without simulation models?" "Yes, ma'am, thousands of rounds, documenting every change." The room went quiet. One engineer muttered under his breath, "She outperformed our labs with nothing but field notes." Riley felt no pride, just weariness. These people wanted formulas, theories, neat explanations. She only had stubbornness, patience, and nights of isolation on empty ranges. For 6 months she worked with them. They tested, recorded, and reverse-engineered the pink rifle's secrets. New prototypes were built, new barrels spun, new optics tuned. Her methods became doctrine, her rifle the template for the next generation of sniper systems. But at night, back in her quarters, the pink rifle sat propped against the wall, silent and accusing. It hadn't been built for labs, it had been built for her. And she didn't know who she was without it in her hands, lying prone on a ridge, staring through a scope with the world holding its breath. News of her achievements spread further than she could imagine. Articles written, military schools updated syllabi. West Point instructors referenced the Riley Thompson effect in lectures about underestimation and bias. Her pink rifle became a metaphor, a case study in how institutions confuse appearance with capability. At Vanguard, where she had once walked through laughter, the atmosphere had changed too. Researchers and journalists visited regularly, pressing the seals for first-hand accounts. Chief Jackson, once her loudest critic, found himself repeating the same line to every visitor. "I was wrong about her from day one. We all were." When asked the lesson, he said it without hesitation. "Judge performance, not appearance. Results, not conformity. That pink rifle taught us more about ourselves than it did about her." Back at Aberdeen, Riley felt the shift most when she received mail. Letters from soldiers she had never met, some written in awkward scrawl, some typed like reports. They poured in, thanking her for proving that difference could be strength. One stood out. "Sergeant Thompson," it began. "They told me I didn't have the right temperament for sniper school, that I wasn't serious enough, not disciplined enough. I almost quit the Army because of it. But then I heard about you, about the pink rifle, about the shot, and I realized maybe being underestimated isn't weakness. Maybe it's fuel. Last month, I made a 2,400-meter shot that saved a convoy. Thank you for showing me that excellence doesn't have to look the way they expect it to." Signed, Specialist Maria Gonzalez. Riley folded the letter carefully and slid it into her desk drawer next to half a dozen others. each one cut sharper than any metal, sharper than the bronze star on her uniform, because they weren't about history. They were about people, lives, futures she had unknowingly changed. And still late at night she returned to the balcony, the scope, the head snapping back, the silence afterward. Respect had spread, change had spread, but inside she remained as still as she had on that ridge, heavy, alone. One evening, Dr. Chen approached her in the lab. "We've finished the prototypes. We can reproduce your modifications now. Your rifle doesn't have to keep being pink anymore. We can issue you a regulation black system, identical performance." Riley looked at her, expression unreadable. "No." Chen blinked. "No." "The paint stays," Riley said quietly. "It's not just color, it's a reminder." Chen studied her a moment longer, then nodded slowly. A reminder. That appearance was a battlefield of its own. That underestimation could be turned into weaponry. That sometimes survival wasn't about strength, but about stillness. Weeks later, orders arrived. She was promoted to Sergeant First Class. Not just reassigned, but tasked with building a new kind of program, a school that sought talent where the Army had overlooked it. Soldiers dismissed for quirks, unconventional methods, odd appearances. She was to find them, train them, shape them. When the promotion ceremony ended, General Hayes himself addressed her. "Your achievement wasn't just about marksmanship, Sergeant. It was about changing how we see soldiers. The military cannot afford to overlook talent because it doesn't fit our mold. You'll ensure we don't." Riley saluted, words caught in her throat. She didn't feel like a pioneer. She felt like a soldier carrying a rifle too heavy to put down. Back in her quarters that night, she laid the pink rifle across her lap. She ran her hands over the stock, tracing the imperfections in the paint, the scratches, the scars. It wasn't just steel. It was 18 months of laughter. It was every moment she had doubted herself. It was silence turned into proof. And now it was legend. But legends, she thought, were lonelier than jokes. She leaned her head against the rifle, eyes closing. For the first time, she whispered to herself what she could never admit out loud. "I don't know who I am without you." The rifle, as always, gave no answer. What do you do when the Army hands you a mirror, and all you see is someone else staring back? 6 months after her transfer to Aberdeen, Riley stood in front of a classroom of soldiers. Not the standard class you'd find in sniper school, no immaculate rows of disciplined recruits, no gleaming rifles all identical. Instead, she looked out at a scattered group of men and women the Army had nearly discarded. Too stubborn, too emotional, too unconventional, too different. She had read their files. She knew the words stamped across their evaluations. Unfit, lacks discipline, does not conform. Words she had felt like weights on her own back for years. Now it was her job to turn those words into something else. She started with silence. She let it stretch, heavy, uncomfortable. She knew what it felt like to stand under someone's gaze and wonder if you belonged. She let them feel it, then broke it softly. "You're here because you don't fit," she said, voice steady. "That's not a flaw. That's the reason you're sitting in this room. The Army missed what you're capable of. My job is to make sure no one else does." The soldiers exchanged wary glances. They weren't used to being told they had potential. She gestured to the pink rifle mounted on the wall behind her. Its paint was chipped now, worn from use and age, but it glowed under the fluorescent lights like a scar that refused to fade. "This rifle," she continued, "was mocked, dismissed, underestimated. People laughed before it ever fired a shot, but it made the longest confirmed kill in history." She let the words settle. Some leaned forward, others straightened unconsciously. "The lesson isn't about color," Riley said. "It's about assumptions. Don't let theirs define you. Don't let yours limit you. Excellence doesn't look one way. It doesn't act one way. It performs. That's all that matters." That became the foundation of what they began calling the Thompson method. Not rules, not rigid drills. Principles. Identify talent in overlooked places. Build shooters by finding stillness, patience, and obsessive precision in personalities others misread as flaws. She worked them hard, harder than she'd ever been worked. Hours on the range, hours in classrooms breaking down physics they thought they'd never understand, hours running calculations until numbers burned into their eyelids at night. But she also gave them space no one had ever given her. When one soldier froze under pressure, she didn't scream. She sat with him in silence until he could breathe again, then said only, "You'll get another chance." When another failed her first 3 range qualifications, Riley didn't cut her. She handed her a fresh box of rounds and told her, "You're still here until you prove me wrong." Slowly, painfully, results began to emerge. Soldiers once discarded as misfits started hitting targets others couldn't. Shots once labeled impossible became routine. They found their stillness. But success came with resistance. Senior instructors questioned her methods. Commanders doubted the wisdom of trusting outliers. More than once she sat across from officers who told her she was wasting resources on soldiers who would never belong. She listened, nodded, and went back to the range. She knew what it felt like to be told you didn't belong. One night, long after the range had emptied, she stayed behind with Specialist Maria Gonzalez, the young woman who had written her that letter months before. Maria's shots were tight at 1,200 meters but scattered at 1,800. Her frustration showed in clenched fists, bitten lips. Riley adjusted her scope for her, then crouched beside her. "You're fighting it too hard." Maria exhaled sharply. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this. They said I wasn't before." Riley studied her, seeing herself in the girl's eyes. The same doubt, the same ache of being dismissed. She placed a hand gently on the stock. "Listen, stillness isn't about control, it's about release. Stop trying to force the bullet. Let it go where it's meant to." Maria adjusted, breath squeezed. The shot rang out, distant steel chiming back. Her eyes widened, hit. Riley allowed herself the faintest smile. "Now do it again." That night, walking back to her quarters, Riley felt something shift inside her. Training Maria, watching her cross the line from doubt to proof, it was like watching herself years earlier. The ache didn't vanish, but for a moment it eased. Letters kept coming. Soldiers she'd never trained wrote of shots made, lives saved, futures reclaimed. Some called her a legend. Some called her an inspiration. She never called herself anything. Because when the lights went out and the room fell silent, she still saw the balcony. She still saw the general's head snap back. She still felt the trigger break beneath her finger. The army wanted her to be a pioneer, a myth, a symbol. But symbols weren't allowed to be tired. They weren't allowed to wake at 3 a.m. with sweat soaking their sheets. They weren't allowed to stare at their own reflection and wonder if they'd only been in the right place at the right time. She carried the weight anyway. One afternoon, as she dismissed class, a young private lingered behind. Nervous, shifting, eyes darting toward the rifle on the wall. "Ma'am," he asked. "Yes, Private." "Why'd you keep it pink? After everything, I mean. You could have repainted it by now." Riley studied him, then glanced at the rifle. For a moment her chest tightened. "Because it reminds me," she said quietly, "of who I was, of what they thought, of what I proved." The private nodded slowly, as if he understood. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. That night she sat alone again with the rifle across her lap, fingers tracing the chipped paint. For all the success, all the respect, all the soldiers who now looked to her as proof, she felt the same stillness inside her, heavy, lonely. And she wondered if this was what legends always became. Not heroes, not myths, just people carrying the weight of a single moment for the rest of their lives. She whispered, softer this time, as though speaking to herself more than the rifle. "Stillness, just stillness." The rifle, as always, said nothing back. What happens when the world remembers you for one moment you can never escape? 3 years had passed since the balcony, since the pink rifle spoke louder than every laugh combined. 3 years since Riley became a name whispered in classrooms, studied in labs, and quoted in speeches. Her students called her SFC Thompson with reverence now. Young shooters walked into her classroom knowing her story before she said a word. The pink rifle hung on the wall like a shrine, chipped paint catching the light, the silent proof of a single impossible act. And yet, when she walked the halls at night after training was over, Riley felt more ghost than mentor. She remembered the first time she realized how far her story had spread. A young officer had stopped her on base, wide-eyed, almost nervous. "You're her, right? The shot at 3,487. He'd spoken the number like scripture. She had nodded politely, given him the same line she always gave. Physics, mathematics, practice. But inside, she'd wanted to shake him, to ask if he understood what else lived behind that number, the weight, the silence, the blood. She never asked. Letters piled higher. Soldiers writing to say she had inspired them to push harder, to stay in when they almost quit, to try again when they failed. Some thanked her for saving their lives without ever meeting them. The letters meant everything and nothing. Because no matter how many she read, when she turned off the light, she always returned to the ridge, to the scope, to the 4 seconds of silence before a man's head exploded and her life split into before and after. She lived in the after. And the after was lonely. The army promoted her again. She attended ceremonies, shook hands with generals, stood stiff in photographs with politicians who wanted to be seen beside the legend. They praised her as a pioneer, a symbol of resilience, proof that diversity made the army stronger. Every speech, every headline, every camera flash felt further away from the woman she actually was. Because Riley Thompson was no symbol. She was a soldier who had once been mocked so hard she painted her rifle pink out of spite. She was a sniper who had fired a shot she half believed was impossible. She was a woman who still woke in the dark hours of night, heart racing, throat dry, seeing the moment over and over until dawn broke. Symbols didn't sweat through their sheets. One night she sat in her quarters with a glass of water, staring at the pink rifle on the wall. She had refused every offer to repaint it, refused every suggestion to retire it quietly into a museum. It stayed with her because it wasn't just a relic. It was her truth. But sometimes she wished she could bury it. A knock broke the silence. Jackson. Older now, lines deeper in his face, but his presence steady as ever. He had become one of the few she trusted, not because he had believed in her, but because he had admitted he hadn't. And somehow, honesty mattered more than praise. "You should be asleep," he said as he stepped inside, his eyes flicking toward the rifle. "Big day tomorrow, another round of briefings." Riley let out a faint breath, not quite a laugh. "Another round of speeches where they talk about me like I'm not in the room." Jackson leaned against the wall. "You don't like being a legend, do you?" She shook her head. "Legends aren't people. Legends don't wake up in the middle of the night. Legends don't feel heavy every time they walk past a rifle." He studied her a moment. "So why keep the rifle? Why not let it go?" Her eyes lingered on the pink paint. "Because it's the only thing that remembers the truth. Everyone else turned it into a story, but it knows. It remembers the silence, the wait, the moment. And so do I." Jackson was quiet. Then he said softly, "Maybe the point isn't to let it go. Maybe the point is to teach others how to carry it." She turned her gaze to him, searching his face. "You think that's what I've been doing?" "I know it is," he said. "You trained Gonzalez. You trained half the new shooters setting records. They carry pieces of you now. The weight isn't just yours anymore." She looked away, throat tight. "It still feels like it is." Silence stretched, heavy but not suffocating. Jackson finally stood. "Get some rest, Thompson. The army doesn't want you to be human, but I do." When he left, Riley sat in the quiet again, staring at the rifle. He was wrong about one thing. She didn't just want to teach others to carry it. She wanted to put it down. But legends don't get to put things down. The next day, she stood before another graduating class of shooters. Men and women once discarded, now transformed. Maria Gonzalez sat in the front row, a rising star, her name already whispered across units the way Riley's once had been. Riley gestured to the pink rifle. This weapon has been mocked, dismissed, laughed at, but it made history because performance doesn't care about appearance. She paused, eyes scanning the room. But the lesson isn't about paint, it's about weight. Every one of you will carry something heavy, a doubt, a failure, a moment you can't escape. You can't put it down, but you can decide what you do with it. That choice will define you more than any medal. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. The room was silent, listening. Maria met her eyes, and for a moment, Riley felt something shift. The weight didn't vanish, but it didn't feel quite as lonely. Later that night, alone again, she sat with the rifle across her knees, running her fingers along the chipped paint. Maybe he's right, she whispered into the silence. Maybe it isn't just mine anymore. For the first time in years, the thought didn't feel like surrender. It felt like release. Stillness. Always stillness. What does it mean to leave a mark, when the mark isn't yours alone? Years later, long after the balcony and the briefing rooms, after the medals and the interviews, after the speeches where generals turned her name into history, Riley Thompson found herself standing in a quiet hall at the Army Museum of Significant Weapons. The air was cool, still, reverent. Spotlights illuminated relics that had shaped wars and rewritten doctrines, and there, behind a pane of glass, stood her rifle, the pink rifle. The paint was chipped and faded, dulled from years of use, but it was unmistakable. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Custom sniper rifle used by SFC Riley Thompson to achieve the longest confirmed kill in military history, 3,487 meters. Proof that effectiveness transcends expectations." Visitors whispered around her, eyes wide, pointing, reverent. Some laughed softly at the color until they read the plaque, and then their expressions shifted. Always the same pattern: dismissal, then awe. Riley stood in silence, hands behind her back, dress uniform pressed and immaculate. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't tell them it had once been mocked as Barbie's dream gun. She didn't explain what it felt like to lie on that ridge, cheek against cold paint, heart steadying against silence. They didn't need to know. The rifle remembered. She turned away from the glass and walked deeper into the hall. Her students had spread out across the Army now and beyond. Maria Gonzalez was a legend in her own right, teaching the next generation with a calm authority Riley recognized as her own reflection. Other soldiers she had trained wrote her letters still, telling her of impossible shots taken, lives saved, respect earned. The Thompson method had become doctrine. What once was unconventional, dismissed, mocked, now lived in classrooms, manuals, training programs. Her fingerprints on a future she could no longer control. And yet, in quiet moments, she still felt the weight. The balcony never left her. The general's head snapping back, the silence afterward, the shift from being nobody to being someone they would never stop talking about. Jackson had retired by then. They spoke occasionally, his voice steadier with age, softened with reflection. He always told her the same thing: "You didn't just make the shot, Riley. You made the space for everyone who came after you." She wanted to believe him. But she knew the truth too. Legends are never asked if they want to be legends. They're made by others, written into stories that don't always match the person inside. One evening, after a long day of teaching, she sat on the range alone. Sunset stretched across the sky, painting it in bruised oranges and deep purples. The air smelled of gunpowder and dust, familiar as breath. She laid prone, cheek against the stock of a training rifle, the pink one long since retired. The steel target stretched into distance, but she didn't fire. She only breathed. In. Hold. Out. Stillness. She thought of her father on that Nebraska field, the .22 heavy in her hands, his voice steady in her ear. Don't force it, Riley. Let the bullet find its truth. She thought of the SEALs' laughter, the mockery, the months of silence she swallowed like rations. She thought of the balcony, the 4 seconds of flight, the silence that became her name. And she thought of Maria's eyes, steady now, carrying the weight forward. Riley lowered the rifle, rolled onto her back, stared up at the darkening sky. Stars flickered into view, faint at first, then brighter as the night claimed the horizon. For the first time in a long time, she let the thought come. It had never really been about proving them wrong. Not Martinez, not Jackson, not even Hayes. It had been about proving herself right. That she belonged. That she was more than the jokes, more than the paint, more than the silence. That excellence didn't need permission, didn't need approval, didn't need to look the way anyone expected it to. Her rifle had spoken for her once, but the lesson had outlived the weapon. Sometimes dignity doesn't argue, it doesn't shout. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Riley closed her eyes, the cool evening air brushing across her skin, and for the first time in years, the stillness didn't feel heavy. It felt like release.